Hi, this is Richard Chamberlain. Welcome back to the Protecting Your Family's Future podcast. This is episode number 114. Today, we're going to be talking about three different ways to distribute assets to your beneficiaries from your trust. So, when you are designing your estate plan, if you're using a trust, you've got some options on how to distribute assets to your beneficiaries. If you're using a will, the will simply says, give the assets to my beneficiaries, and that is done in what's called an outright distribution. And you can do that same kind of a distribution from a trust. So the first way to distribute assets from a trust is as an outright distribution. What that simply means is the trustee of the trust just gives the assets to the beneficiary, whether it's a check for the money in the accounts, or transferring accounts directly to the beneficiary, or transferring real estate. And what you get in that situation is the beneficiary is the outright owner of those assets. That subjects those assets to potential creditors of the beneficiary, to the beneficiary's spouse, puts it at risk for if the beneficiary would get divorced. So that's not always the best option. Now, the next way to distribute assets from a trust is in a protective trust share. And that can really be done two different ways. But let's talk about what a protective trust share is first. That is where instead of the assets being distributed outright to the beneficiary, they are retained in the trust. So after you pass away, the assets that are to be held for the beneficiary are not given outright to the beneficiary. They are retained in a trust share for the beneficiary. The trustee of that trust share is instructed to distribute the assets to the beneficiary the way you've designed the plan to work, whether that is distributing solely in the trustee's discretion or for the beneficiary's needs, or at certain intervals, or when the beneficiary hits certain ages. So there are a lot of different ways to design how the trust share is set up for each individual beneficiary, but that's generally what a protective trust share is. And as I said, there are two different ways to make that protective trust share work, and you're going to want to use one of them for each individual beneficiary you decide to use this method for. The first is you allow the beneficiary to serve as the trustee of their own protective trust share. So the beneficiary is also the trustee. The trustee beneficiary is making the decisions about what to distribute to themselves from their trust share. So if they need something, they have the ability to distribute it to themselves. This gives them the ability to control the assets, but also the ability to protect the assets from all those things we mentioned before: the creditors, spouses, creditors, divorce. So that is really the hybrid approach where we are allowing the beneficiary control, but also allowing them protection. The third way to distribute assets from your trust is to have a third party serve as the trustee of that trust share for the beneficiary. So that is where the beneficiary is not making the decisions on what to distribute to themselves. You have someone else with the authority over those assets. That person's responsibility is to follow the instructions in the trust that you've set to distribute the assets to the beneficiary or for the beneficiary's needs. So you might want to have this last way of setting up the trust for those beneficiaries who are not capable of managing their own property and or financial affairs. Maybe they are minors, or maybe they are just young and inexperienced or immature with money. Maybe they have creditor problems. Maybe they have addiction issues. So you don't want to give them outright access and control over the assets, you can set the trust up to allow someone else to do that for them. So if you have questions about setting up your own estate plan and how you might design your trust for your beneficiaries, if you're in Ohio or in Michigan, you can reach out to us and we can help you with that. Our contact information is in the show notes. And I hope that's helpful for you today, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks.